There are loves that have not yet begun before they have to part. There are words that have not yet been spoken before they turn into memories. In that small city they met, fell in love, and parted. Part I, Letters to the Distance. The summer days. The first time Ethan saw Lena, the afternoon sun was spilling over the old university courtyard, painting the cracked stone tiles gold. The heat carried the scent of burning grass, faintly mixed with the sweetness of ripening guava trees. Somewhere in the distance, a guitar hummed a wandering melody, almost lost in the murmurs of students rushing between lectures. She was sitting under the shadow of a flame tree, her notebook open on her lap, her head slightly bent as strands of chestnut brown hair brushed against her cheeks. Ethan had passed by that courtyard countless times before, but that day, it felt different, as if someone had stretched a single note of music across the air, just for him. He didn't approach her, not then. Instead, he found himself walking slower each day, memorizing little fragments of her presence, how her pen twirled between her fingers, how her lips moved silently as she read, how sunlight pooled on her shoulders like liquid honey. He told himself it was nothing, just a passing curiosity. Yet every afternoon he returned to the courtyard, and every time his footsteps hesitated, weeks passed, and the air grew heavy with summer rains. One evening, Ethan found himself caught under the library's overhang as rain lashed against the courtyard, thunder rolled distantly, and the orange lamps flickered in the storm. He stood there, drenched in silence, until a soft voice startled him. "You didn't bring an umbrella either?" He turned, and she was there, Lena, hugging her notebook tightly to her chest, raindrops beating on her lashes. "I didn't expect the rain," Ethan stammered, suddenly conscious of his soaked shirt clinging to his shoulders. She smiled a quick, quiet smile, and stood beside him under the narrow shelter. The downpour blurred the courtyard into a watercolor painting. They stood there without speaking for a long while, watching water trace silver veins down the pavement. Then, softly, she hummed a tune. Ethan recognized it instantly, a folk song his grandmother used to sing. "You know that song?" he asked. "My father used to play it on the guitar," Lena said, her voice barely rising above the rain. Something fragile settled between them that night, like an invisible thread pulled taut by chance and melody. After that, their paths crossed more often, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes by quiet intent. They discovered the rooftop of the old humanities building, a place no one visited after sunset. From up there, the city sprawled out like a constellation, patches of neon tangled streets, the river cutting through everything like a dark ribbon. One night, Ethan brought his guitar. "What will you play?" Lena asked, settling beside him on the cold concrete, hugging her knees. "Something unfinished," he said. "A song I've been carrying around but never had the courage to finish." He played softly, and the notes stumbled, fragile at first, then steadier as she began to hum along. Her voice was untrained, but it carried warmth, like a lantern in the dark. "You should finish it," she whispered when he stopped. "I don't know the ending yet." "Then write it," she said simply. Ethan didn't tell her that some part of the song had always belonged to her, even before he met her. It became their unspoken ritual meeting on the rooftop, talking about everything and nothing. The books she read, the future he feared, the places they dreamed of seeing. Lena wanted to travel Paris in spring, Kyoto in autumn, Santorini's endless blue summers. Ethan listened, smiling faintly, because all he wanted was to stay in this city, in this moment, with her. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. They simply lay on their backs, watching airplanes cross the velvet night, leaving faint trails of light behind them. Lena would point at them and whisper, "Imagine where they're going." And Ethan would think, "I don't need to imagine, because wherever you are, that's where I want to go." But he never said it. Instead, he began writing letters never sent, never signed, just words he couldn't give her, folded neatly into a journal. "Lena, some nights, I wonder if we are just two stars passing in a vast sky. I want to reach you, but I am afraid of burning out before I get there. Summer didn't last forever. It never does." As August crept in, the campus grew quieter, the afternoons shorter. Lena talked more often about her internship abroad, about the scholarship she was likely to get in Vienna. Ethan listened, nodding, even smiling, though inside, something fragile began to crack. "Will you miss this?" she asked one evening on the rooftop, her voice unusually soft. He didn't know how to answer. Instead, he handed her his guitar. "Play something," he said. She shook her head. "I can't." "Try," he urged, and so she did, pressing tentative fingers against the strings, pulling uneven notes from the instrument. She laughed at herself, and he laughed with her, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had stopped moving. But time never stops. The night before she left, they returned to the rooftop one last time. The city below was alive with restless lights, but up there, everything was silent. "Promise me something," Lena said, breaking the hush. "What?" "Don't stop writing your songs." Ethan swallowed hard, nodded. "And you don't stop looking for places worth seeing." She smiled, but her eyes were wet. He wanted to tell her everything, that she was the melody he'd been searching for, that every unfinished song began and ended with her name. But the words stayed trapped in his chest, heavy and unsaid. Instead, he reached for her hand. For the first time, she didn't pull away. They sat like that until dawn blurred the edges of the city, and then she was gone. Ethan didn't watch her plane take off. He couldn't. But he remembered the way she hummed that old folk tune under the rain, and he carried it with him into his songs, into his silences, into every letter he would never send. This was the summer that would haunt him forever, not because it ended, but because it was never allowed to begin. Part 2. The Unsent Letters. The sun had set behind the western mountains, but in Ethan's small room, the remaining light from the window seemed enough to illuminate the white sheets of paper spread across his desk. He sat still, pen in hand, eyes fixed on the paper as if searching for a miracle. "Lena," he whispered, but the voice only echoed back in the empty room. It was the first time after months of silence that he tried to write letters. Letters he would never send, but for Ethan, they were a refuge for every longing. He wrote about the rainy afternoons in the corners of the streets, the rustling leaves, the melodies she had loved that he still listened to quietly in this room. Every word, every sentence seemed to carve itself into his heart, as if failing to write them down would make his longing overflow and overwhelm him. These letters were not only messages, they were fragments of living memory, where he could see Lena smile, hear her laughter, feel the warmth of her hand once again. He wrote about the times he imagined their reunion, walking down autumn streets, hands entwined, the late sunlight brushing against her hair. Music still played in his mind. The songs they had shared, simple yet poignant melodies, each note piercing his heart. In one letter, he wrote, "Today it's raining. The rain falls into this room, into my heart. I miss you more than the rain itself, Lena. If I could, I would send all this longing to you." Then he would stop, read it, and tear it up. He knew that if he sent it, she might not reply. Years of distance had taught him that sometimes love must remain in the heart, silent yet treasured. Yet these unsent letters brought him peace. He could cry, he could smile, he could live with every fragment of longing without anyone seeing, without judgment. Each letter was like a silent song, echoing softly in the small room, mingling with the whisper of wind outside the window. Ethan often recalled the days they had spent together. Afternoons wandering in the park, wind rustling through the trees, the faint scent of jasmine in the air. Nights spent sitting side by side, listening to the music they had chosen together, watching the star-filled sky. These images had become a guiding light in his darkness, and each letter was a tiny lamp illuminating that longing. Sometimes, he imagined Lena reading the lines he had never sent. He pictured her smile, her eyes glistening as they touched each word. And he told himself that, at least for that moment, they were close again, despite the oceans that separated them, despite the reality that still kept them apart. The unsent letters were also where he confessed things he had never dared speak. He wrote about his fear of losing her, about the pain of watching her drift further away in his memory, about the small joys they had shared. He wrote about music, rain, passing autumns, and the loneliness that crept through ordinary moments of the day. One afternoon, he turned on his old radio, letting the music fill the room. A song they had once listened to together played alone in the empty space. He picked up his pen, letting each word follow the rhythm of the melody. Each note guided his emotions. Each sentence beat in sync with the tune. Ethan knew these letters would never reach Lena, but it did not matter. What mattered was that he allowed his longing to exist, that he admitted his heart still leaned toward her, that love remained pure, even if incomplete. In the small room, the fading sunset painted a pale, golden hue over the papers. Ethan put down his pen and inhaled deeply, letting the longing spread through the space, carried along the music, along the rhythm of the rain outside. He smiled. The unsent letters had brought him closer to Lena, even if reality kept her far away. And he promised himself, one day, though he did not know when or how, he would see her again. Until then, the letters, the music, the memories, and the imagined moments would be his only refuge. A testament that love, though distant and incomplete, could remain pure and endlessly yearning.
Saying we were never in vain.
Part 3. The distance we cannot touch. Years had passed. Time had shifted like silent tides, washing away their youth but never their memories. Ethan had moved to another city, a place of glass, towers, rushing crowds, and nameless streets carrying with him an unspoken longing, hidden deep beneath layers of new routines and unvoiced regrets. Every morning, he walked through life like a well-rehearsed play. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, a fragment of himself still lingered in another time, another place, with her. Lena, too, had followed her own path. Her life glittered on the surface, a stable job, a warm apartment, a circle of friends who adored her. Yet beneath the laughter and casual conversations, there was an undertow of quiet sorrow, a haunting of what might have been. Sometimes, late at night, she caught herself staring at the ceiling, wondering if love could have rewritten their story had timing been kinder. Fate, however, has a strange way of folding back upon itself. It was on a crisp autumn morning, in a city neither of them had ever called home, that Ethan saw her again. The sky was pale and soft, draped with clouds that carried whispers of rain. The golden leaves spiraled in the wind, landing silently upon cobblestone streets that smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts and distant sea air. He had been walking without destination, lost in thought, when he glanced across the square, and there she was. Lena, standing at the entrance of a small cafe, adjusting her scarf against the cold breeze, her hair catching the morning light. She was older now the same, yet changed. There was a grace in her movements, a quietness in her posture, as though life had both worn her down and polished her into something softer, deeper. For a moment, the world became silent. Ethan froze where he stood. Memories came rushing back like a storm breaking against fragile glass. Late-night calls that stretched into dawn. The shared silences that once spoke louder than words. the laughter that bridged the distance between them when oceans seemed smaller than circumstances. "Lena," he whispered under his breath, though she was too far to hear. And yet, as if pulled by an invisible thread, she turned. Their eyes met across the street, and just like that, the years dissolved. The city, the noise, the passing strangers, they all faded into the background, leaving only the ghost of a memory between them, alive once more. But so did the possibility. Ethan wanted to cross the street. He wanted to call out her name, to reclaim fragments of the life they had once dreamt of, to ask her all the questions that had been gathering dust inside him for years. But then he noticed something, a glimmer of silver on her hand, catching the sunlight as she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. A wedding band. His throat tightened. Lena's lips parted slightly, almost forming his name. Her eyes softened, holding within them every unsent letter, every missed call, every 1,000 moments they had lost to time and circumstance. Yet neither of them moved, because some distances cannot be crossed, not by footsteps, not even by love. A car passed between them, briefly breaking their gaze. When it cleared, she was still there, but something had shifted, as if reality had drawn its line in the sand. Ethan offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. Lena mirrored it, her expression unreadable but achingly familiar. And then, slowly, she turned and walked into the cafe. Ethan stood there a while longer, until the cold seeped through his coat and the sounds of the world returned. Later that day, he wandered along the riverbank. The city's skyline stretched ahead, jagged and endless, while the sound of water lapped gently against the stone embankment. The breeze carried the faint scent of rain and distant music from an open window somewhere far away. He thought of all the letters he had written to her, but never sent the ones hidden in old notebooks, beneath coffee-stained pages and faded ticket stubs. He thought of the melodies he had composed late at night, hoping she would somehow hear them, as if music could bridge what life had broken. And he realized then, love doesn't always demand a destination. Sometimes it exists purely in the act of longing in the quiet space between two souls who once touched and then drifted apart, tethered not by presence but by memory. That night, miles away, Lena stood by her apartment window, staring at the city lights. The glow from the street lamps painted faint constellations on the glass. She traced them with her fingertip, each point a memory of him. Their first conversation, the way he always paused before speaking, the soft hum of his guitar when he couldn't find the right words. She wondered if he still brewed his coffee the way he used to, slow, patient, waiting for the exact shade of amber to bloom in the cup. She wondered if he still carried his old notebook, the one with frayed corners and sketches of dreams too fragile to name. Somewhere in the quiet, they both smiled, not because they were happy, but because they had once been. Their story didn't need a grand ending. The beauty lay in its incompleteness, in the way it lingered like an unfinished song, one whose final note would never be played, yet somehow existed perfectly within the silence. Years from now, Ethan would still remember the way Lena used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way her laughter carried even through a bad phone connection, as though distance could never dull its warmth. Lena would still think of how Ethan always paused before answering, as if weighing his words like precious stones before setting them free. They were no longer each other's present, nor each other's future, but they would always be each other's somewhere in time, and perhaps that was enough. Some distances are not meant to be closed, some loves are not meant to be fulfilled, yet in the quiet chambers of memory, they remain untouched, eternal, unbroken, beautiful.
Every